All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of The Property Couch. And today it's one of our favorite days, Ben. It's Q&A day, where we get to listen to the questions that you want to hear the most. And so we're going to cover topics like, should we reno now, Ben, or should we reno later? Or the old chestnut of, got a case as to why we should buy new properties over established. But what else, Ben?
Mate, we're talking tax, Bryce, another tax grab from a state government. We're talking windfall tax, and we've got this other great old chestnut around diversification. The big question about how to manage a diversified investment portfolio. So we're into that, and I'll have another dig at APRA at the end of the show as well. So stay tuned for that one as well.
Very good, folks. We cover a lot today. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to The Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance, and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you too, mate. How are you this week?
Mate, I'm happy. I'm well. You know, everything's good. I've had an excellent weekend. The last weekend, we had the Rallos over. It was Lorna's, my wife's mum's 70th birthday. We had a couple of surprise guests turn up for the dinner. Everyone had a great time. So yes, it was a wonderful weekend.
Surprise guest, like, you know, Dave Hughes or, you know, the Prime Minister?
No, her son from Western Australia as well. So they didn't realise. And then also one of her cousins came across as well, close cousin. Yeah. So we had a lovely dinner, and they just didn't realise that everyone would actually be there. They thought they were coming to Melbourne for, you know, to catch up with Jane and us after 5 years of not being here. And then all of a sudden, the farmer brother turns up, or her son turns up. So it was.
Oh, mate, that was nice, keeping that a surprise.
Well, that's right. I mean, Jane takes all the credit. She did a wonderful job in doing all of that. We didn't tell anyone, even the kids. So,
well, Jane takes the credit for everything at the Kingsley Manor, really, let's be honest.
Pretty much, that's true. That is true. That is true.
Very good. I can do the same here. But, very good. I was up in the Big Smoke on the weekend, mate. Just came up to Melbourne and enjoyed the spoils of city life. So it was
very good. Anything particular that caught your eye?
Andrew and I, we stayed at the Crown Towers, mate. It was our 15-year anniversary. So there you go. We
lovely.
From the beach, you go to the city for a break, and we go to the beach for the break. So anyway, boring stuff. Hey, today we're going to talk about Q&A day, which we love.
Yes.
And you will hear from four brave souls who have gone on and they've left a message on SpeakPipe, Ben. So what I want to do is encourage folks for the next SpeakPipe one that we do.
Yeah.
We want you to come on and actually tell us the questions that you've got around these things: cost of living pressures, interest rates rising, and if you're considering whether you should sell a property right now. Are you actually someone who's like, whoa, this is making me a bit uncomfortable, or I think I'd rather send away the pain and just sell it and all those sorts of things. So if you can relate to, should I sell right now? Interest rates are causing you some pain. There is some cost of living pressures. What are your questions that you'd like us to tackle on behalf of yourself and also the benefit of our community? So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au, there is a little button there. It's yellow. Press it. It's just like having a Zoom or a Teams meeting these days, Ben. Everyone knows what to do. Just get your microphone on, ask the question, and we'll catch you, and we'd love to hear from you. So that's in preparation for the very next one, Ben. And anyone who gets their question read out on this podcast, we send them a free copy of our Start and Build program, which is normally $497. So just to give you a little incentive, get read out, you get the course, which is great. A couple of things, circle back from last week, Ben. We did an episode on people with cost of living pressures. We've had a pretty good response, to be honest, where people were saying, yeah, that resonated. I want to go and talk to my broker and see if I can actually get a little bit of that action where we can take back some of these interest margins from the banks and put it back into their pocket. So if you haven't listened to that, go and circle back and have a listen through to that. Our team is on standby if you need some help with what you hear from that to help you save on some interest. Also, Ben, to that point, one of the gauges in Moorr can help with that around spending speed.
Yeah, so I put together a little tutorial, Bryce, about how to make your wealth speed go faster. Now, one of the critical gauges inside the wealth speed tree is the gauge on spending speed. And so ultimately, with the cost of pressures going up, I talk about essential and discretionary spending in the form of needs and wants. And you can go into the platform and you can play around with, effectively your discretionary and essential spending, and that'll show you just how much you're reducing your spending speed, and then ultimately how that then flows up to making your wealth speed go faster. So you're actually making that money move quicker for you. And if you are, people who are, flowing, sort of tight to the breeze, as they say, I think is they're saying, or flapping into the breeze or whatever it is, there's definitely an opportunity there to look at that spending side. Because obviously that's the first area we're going to go, and we'll obviously be talking more about that in the upcoming episode when we double click on cost of living and we sort of start to look at some of the big areas where there can be savings to make sure that your spending speed is going down, which means that your saving speed is going up, which means your overall wealth clock and wealth speed are going up. So the link will be in the show notes.
Speed, Ben? What is your wealth speed?
What is your wealth speed? So the link will be in the show notes. You can go straight to that tutorial and check it out.
Hey, we turned 8 last week as well, Ben. On the 23rd of February 2015, you and I riffed off our first podcast. We fixed bad property advice. Here we are 8 years later. So we turned 8. Go on.
I've got me a little. It's not going to work right because of this new technology, this AI, which blocks out. So if I go, you don't hear it, right? Because nothing. It's very clever now where it blocks out that sound. And so people can't hear me blowing my little whistle to sort of wish us a happy birthday.
But we got gifts, Ben. We got gifts for our podcast community and action takers. So for the next 7 days, we've got gifts.
We have a super gift, right? So, in the family, we've got Select Residential Property, which is our research platform. So if, again, you click on the link in the show notes, we'll take you straight there. But show description. Thank you very much. We have suburb reports. So you can get a very, very detailed subscription and analysis that we have in these suburb reports. Now, Bryce, they're normally $39 each, right? 39. For every one that you buy. Here we go. But exclusively for our community, for the next 7 days, Bryce, you can get 5 of them for free. Up to 5. So you can do 5 suburbs, pick your 5 suburbs, houses or units, have a look at the analysis. So if you've got existing property, you can check in on how the market's performing from a demand supply point of view. We've got all the latest 21 census data analytics in terms of the demography and demographics around that sort of stuff. We've got even, Bryce, there's a forecast growth story in each one of those reports as well. So you get basically a 3 to 5 year forecast of capital growth for that particular suburb as well. And it's completely free. But please, again, 5, a maximum of 5 for each of our community, 7 days only.
7 days.
7 days only to celebrate our birthday.
So let's be clear. This will go, this episode is Thursday, the 2nd of March, Ben.
Yep.
Thursday, the 2nd of March. Don't forget to go to Ed Sheeran tonight. So Thursday, the 2nd of March. So they've got till Thursday, the 9th of March, 2023, just in case someone's listening to this in 2 years' time, Ben, to go to give us the website.
Yeah, so selectresidentialproperty.com.au. And again, in the show notes, you'll see a link that will take you straight there. So the
show notes is now show description.
Show description. Sorry.
And the code is, here's the code, folks, for when you get to the checkout, TPC birthday.
Yep. Type in TPC birthday. So if you do all 5, that's $195. That will then just be erased to 0. And then you'll just process that. And ultimately you get your 5 reports. They'll be able to be downloaded, but they'll also be emailed to you as well. So they are extensive reports.
Very extensive reports. So folks, here's my advice to you. Hit pause right now. Just hit the pause button. Oh, I probably should have said this before the pause button. For those of you that are still here, go to the show description, click on the link. It'll take you there. and then just download your reports. Get that done before you listen to the rest of the episode, because it's 7 days. And tell a friend. Tell a friend. Get them amongst the property.
Yeah, we want to share. We want to share. We've got all this rich data. And so it allows people to see just how insightful these reports are as well. So we obviously win because we're all about, encouraging the community to get educated. And from our point of view, the data's there.
Go and do the house I live in, where my other properties are, like that. That's just insightful stuff. So go and check that out, folks. And one last favour we're going to ask of our community: if you have downloaded Moorr, MOOR, we're asking for a favour because of the way that all of the stores work in terms of downloads. If you're having a good experience, would you please go and hit 5 stars for us to help us get the reviews, because that makes a difference. Shows up in all the algorithms of where they are. So if you could do that, you don't have to write a written review. You can just hit the 5 stars. That'll go. If you want to write a review, we would love that, because we love feedback. But don't want to have any friction here. What we need is the reviews to help us with the algorithms. Now, if you have some feedback for us on how we can improve as well, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email. Go through all of our standard channels for that. But if you could send us a 5-star review, Ben, we would very much appreciate it.
We would love it, Bryce. And now inside the app, we already asked for a review. And so people might have said, well, I've actually given you the rating, and we have a fantastic rating, over 90% satisfaction with the app. So we're thrilled with that, because we've got so much more coming. But we're actually talking about that review in the app stores. So that's the Apple store or the Google Play Store. If you give us those reviews there, because we do get feedback internally in the app, which is awesome. But we do also, that to Bryce's point, that just helps in people getting to learn more about it and giving it a go. And obviously it's the home of Money Smarts. It's the home of Money Stretch, Money Fit, Wealth Clock, Wealth Speed, My Goals. It's all in there. So there's obviously a lot of value to it as well if you haven't checked it out.
If you haven't checked it out, it's free. Go and check it out. Download it. The standard app is free and always will be free for those baseline metrics that Ben just talked about. Hey, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is a quote by Angus Campbell. I got it out of the book of the person that we are going to interview next week around behavioural economics, which is a fascinating study. The book's got amazing detail. Cannot wait to rip into that. So just an ode to the information that we are going to tap into next week. In the book, it says, having a strong sense of controlling one's life is a more dependable predictor of positive feelings of well-being than any of the objective conditions of life we've considered. That's Angus Campbell. So like, if you feel like you're in control, you feel like you have a better chance of being happy, right? So it goes on to say, according to the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, the number one contributor to happiness is autonomy. That is the feeling that your life, its activities and habits are self-chosen and self-endorsed. So kind of that one resonated for me, because I feel like that's what we're trying to do here, is to get people to that flagship $2,000 a week. Because if they are then in control of their destiny, they will feel, according to the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, they will feel that it's a big contributor to their happiness, right? So I was chatting to a guy locally last Wednesday, Ben, here in Torquay. I'll keep names away to protect the innocent, but he was going through a bit of a tough time previously, had some health challenges. And as a result of those health challenges, meant that wasn't able to work, right? And if you're not able to work, you're not able to support yourself. And then you start to feel like you're a burden on others, including your family members. And all of a sudden that becomes a negative spiral, right?
Wow,
Burden, that sort of stuff. And he was really open and transparent and authentic about the conversation I had with him. Had a really, really good time connecting. But the best part about the story is realised that through some mechanisms, and again, won't go through it, was able to receive a lump sum of money. And what that meant was he was able to then have some autonomy that wasn't experienced before, was able to be self-directed and have some form of freedom. Now, he, by his own admission, would tell you that he doesn't have a flash car and doesn't have a flash house and doesn't do flash things. But that sense of well-being that comes from being able to self-direct from that particular event has had a significant impact. So I guess at various levels that people are at, you and I live a blessed life. We have wonderful things happen to us. For all intensive purposes, we are one of the luckiest people on earth. But there are a bunch of people who don't enjoy that same sort of freedoms that you and I have. But just the little wins along the way, particularly for this person that I spoke to, allowed them to open up that happiness. I could see a difference, telling me the stories about what it was like just a short time ago, and now how they're feeling about their life, given that they have that ability to be in control of their own destiny and have that level of autonomy and not be relying on anyone else. So hopefully that's resonating with some folks, Ben. It is our mission to get you in control of your own autonomy through getting $2,000 per week on this podcast.
It's a good story, mate, and obviously more of it. I mean, everything that we do for the community is about getting you in control of your money and then making your money work for you so you can build out that financial freedom, that financial piece as we talk about it. And it's a transformational story, right? And so you are the heroes on the journey. If we can be a guide of some description to help you on that journey, so be it. We are honoured and privileged and humbled to be able to add, some context to that story for you.
Yeah, and hopefully we're giving you some frameworks and some pebbles in the creek for you to be able to navigate and get across the other side. So ponder that for the week, folks, that having a strong sense of controlling one's life is a more dependable predictor of positive feelings of well-being than any of the objective conditions of life we have considered. All right, let's rip into today's show. Q&A day, Ben. We love this. Our first question is from Kristy. This question is about now or later. Should I renovate now or should I renovate later? Let's have a little listen to this question now from Kristy.
Hello to the Property Couch and all listeners. My question relates to an investment property I have in Geelong. It's a 1980s property in original condition on a very large block, and it's planned to be a long-term hold. I'm trying to examine two strategies. The first being to simply rent it out and renovate it when perhaps it's time to sell, maybe in 20 years, versus renovate now and rent it out. Where would we be in 20 years? With the first strategy, the property would be very run down by then. With the second strategy, the property would likely need another reno. Of course, I'm trying to be smart with the numbers to see where we might end up. Which strategy would produce more capital growth? Any thoughts or suggestions with how I might evaluate this? Many thanks and can't wait to hear back from you.
Very good question, Kristy. Should we do it now, Ben, or should we do it later?
I love our audience and our community, Bryce. They're so smart. They've got awesome questions. And this is a classic one of trying to do the numbers around renovating. So there's a little bit to unpack here. I've got a few things to add. First of all, you've got to understand, the personal circumstances, and you've got to also look at the property. So we got a little clue there, very large block. Okay, so I'm then thinking about future productive use. Because remember, we've talked to you about long-term value is always in the land. It's not necessarily in the improvements on the land. So if the long-term productive use of that is to turn that into 3 townhouses, even if you did a nice little reno on it, over 20, 30, 40, 50 years, someone potentially is going to come in there and put 3 townhouses on it. So that's one consideration. The other consideration in terms of what you're looking at here is what assumptions are we making around equity release? So if I'm thinking that this is a trigger for us to actually put a reno into the property, then get it revalued, and that gives me an opportunity to release equity so I can add another property to the portfolio. If that's the case, well then obviously renovating earlier rather than later could be a good thing. If that is, remember our ratios, a minimum of $2 valuation for every $1 that we put in. Anything above that, like 1 to 3 is awesome, but also consider the current circumstances of the market. You've got very, very high construction costs. You've got banks who are being conservative about valuations. So timing that could be a consideration. Now, let's move that to the side. So let's just assume now this is the only property that we're going to invest and hold for the long term. So my view on this is really simple. I work on the default view that you exhaust the usable life of all of the fixtures and fittings and the livings within the property. All right. So it doesn't matter if it's not the latest and greatest, doesn't matter if it's old laminate, as long as it's safe and functional, then I would exhaust the usable life of all of that. So that gives you another 5, 7, 10 years of use of the wear and tear and so forth. That is where I would go. And I'd always look to repair rather than replace where I could as well. Now, so that's my default position. My final point to that is if you are looking to do the renovation, work on this general rule of thumb. The rule of thumb I want you to work on is for every $1,000 that I put into a renovation or an improvement, I want to get at least $1 per week, $1 per week in additional rent to justify that investment. And that's a really safe rule of thumb, because it also means that you're yielding slightly higher than most markets are at the moment, but it's that classic rule of thumb for every, effectively for every $1,000 you're getting $1 rent, which is a really nice rule of thumb if you can get it.
Like the good old days, Ben, when you
Yes.
When you used to get for $500,000 property, you'd get $500 a week, which was close to that.
Just over $5% yields, right? 5.2% yields. Unbelievable.
I think there's an important question there, because renoing isn't just something you do, Ben. I think you talk to the point where you've got to get renoing that actually has an impact. So for you to actually spend $1,000 to get the dollar, you actually have to be able to know where to put the money that'll actually attract the maximum return. So you'd want to be talking to your property manager to say, okay, well, where does, for this particular property in this particular location, where will I get the most impact on increased rent? But my feedback is similar to yours. Like, you can't help but project your own default position here, because I don't know what Kristy's risk profile is. I don't know if they've bought any other properties. I don't know if it's the fifth one in the portfolio, if it's the first one in the portfolio, but I'm like you. I heard, large piece of land, in Geelong.
Yes.
That would, you'd want to turn apples into apple pie on that if you could. So whether or not renovation is the best strategy, or whether or not redevelopment is the best strategy, if that's possible. But the other part about redeveloping is you don't necessarily, it's okay to have the desire, but do you have the capacity, right? Yeah. Because if you're going and putting 3 townhouses on, and depending on what the spec is, you're bringing up another 7 figures, probably in debt, if you can't pay cash for it. And then what is the strategy to retire that out? Because ultimately you want to have the cash flow. So there's lots and lots of questions here. But you asked for us to give you our thought process here, Kristy, around how we would assess that. If you can develop the land, would you be in a position to develop the land? Yes or no? If the answer is no, okay, let's move back to reno. If it's reno, I'm with Ben right now. With all of the environment that we're in, do you have the capacity? Do you already have cash set aside that you can do the reno, or do you need to go and release it? So maybe the strategy is, instead of waiting 20 years, you can wait 5 years, so that you can actually still get some growth in that time. But what I do like about the renovation story, if you're a property investor and you can cash flow it and it works for you, is you do 3 things. If done right, you can increase the yield to the formula that Ben just spoke to. You will get depreciation benefits, which ultimately means you get non-cash deductions over a period of amortizing over a number of years, which means you get some tax relief, which helps with cash flow. And then if you've done it right, you'll increase the value, because the land is what does the heavy lifting. But clearly, if you do the right things with the reno, you can get an emotional response to that, which has some increasing in value. So there is a bit there to consider. But ultimately, I just want to celebrate one thing, Kristy, and it's a message for everyone who's listening to this podcast. Your time horizon was the biggest hint for how good an investor you are, because you weren't talking 20 months, you weren't talking 2 years, you were talking a 2-decade time horizon. And the reality is that the broader your time horizon, the larger your chance for success is, which is incredible. So what we also don't know is how long you've owned it for. So,
and Bryce, if I can put a bow on what you were talking about in terms of the renovation piece, the redevelopment piece. If you are in that position in, say, 20 years' time and it needs another renovation, and you were thinking of selling, hopefully you won't have to sell, but it could just be a cash cow for forever. But if you did, that's the conversation you also want to have an agent at that time as well. It's like, so if I put 50 or 80 grand into this, is it going to give me, the $100,000 or $160,000 additional return that I'll be looking at if I did choose to sell, versus if I just leave it as is and the builders come in and give me an offer because they're going to turn it into 3 townhouses or 4 townhouses? That's the trade-off at that moment in time. Now, you won't know the answer to that. So this is where it gets difficult in terms of doing your numbers, but that's certainly a consideration that you'll want to be thinking about, which comes back to our point of leave renovation, leave any upgrades to the last thing you do, and try and extract every bit of value that you can out of the existing dwelling and all of its fixtures and fittings, and you'll be well placed to get the maximum return from both a yield point of view, but also from a capital growth point of view.
But hopefully, Kristy, you're working towards the plan of $2,000 a week or some meaningful form for yourself. The plan for us is roughly buy 3 investment properties, combine it with your super over the journey, and you should be able to do that if you get some debt retirement in the space. So 20 years, hopefully you can accumulate some more along the way, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into how Ben and I would approach this particular property. But 1980s, obviously, it's in it'll talk to another question that we've got coming up too, Ben, around the estate would have been new back in the 80s. It's a bit older now. It's some 40 years old. What does that look like? But does that help, Kristy? Let us know. Send us a note. Reach out to us on socials. Hopefully that's been of benefit too. Hey, I got a question here from Wayne, Ben, and it's a common question that comes up that we've talked about for 8 years. But I feel like it never gets old, it never gets tired about this question, because it is a question that everyone has, versus new versus established. Why, and more importantly, the why about why you choose one over the other.
Yeah, g'day boys. Wayne here from Brisbane. I want to ask a question here. I'm a little worried that my the quality of the information or advice might be tainted, but I'm going to start off with Go the Pies. So I've been listening to your podcast for quite some time now. I've circled through most of the episodes. One of the questions I have around the established properties versus obviously the house and land packages and so on. I get that there's a whole issue with the supply and demand in new estates and all that sort of stuff. I guess where the confusion for me comes is generally the properties will experience growth because the phases and the stages of new developments, obviously the land gets more expensive. I don't think it ever gets cheaper. So that would kind of dictate that you're actually going to get some capital growth even in the early stages. And if you're buying for the long term, 20, 30 years, then obviously at some point these new estates are going to become the established estates as they open up more land, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously the savings that happen in terms of stamp duty being paid on new purchases, if you're only paying it on the land, there's significant savings there. The non-cash deductions on new properties, obviously there's significant rebates and that sort of stuff there from a tax perspective. So I'm just wondering why it's kind of not the accepted way to go. Not that it's, as I said, I'm not disputing what you guys teach. Obviously, you've been doing this a heck of a lot longer than I have. But, I just wonder if you can explain, am I missing something, or, am I reading it right and just, it's one of the options that are available to us?
There you go, Ben. Question from Wayne. I'm disinterested based on the fact that he's a Pie supporter. So over to you, mate. Let me know when you finish.
I mean, how smart is he? How smart is he? Like, he's just so smart being a Pie supporter. But,
starting with that wasn't smart, let's be honest.
Asking the right question as well, I would have thought. Hey, so Wayne, here's the deal, right? We have to talk in general terms because we can't do the 16,000 suburbs across the nation, and with new suburbs, being established every month, every quarter across the country. What we can tell you in the data is it's very clear that usually in the first decade in which that subdivision is created, that there's an underperformance in regards to the actual capital appreciation that occurs in that area. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. The first one is traditionally around the supply side. So usually these greenfield areas have a lot of other vacant land around them. And so to your point, eventually they will become established areas. But really established areas take, 10, 20 odd years for them to become established areas and get what we call system growth. And what you'll normally find is when investors and homeowners are going into those areas, the land to asset ratio isn't aligned where it needs to be, where it means that the dwelling is being built and maybe costing more than 40% the overall mix of the cost. So in other words, a good rule of thumb is 60% in the land, 40% in the dwelling for freestanding houses. That'll serve you very, very well if you're looking at that as a model. So what we're talking about here is there is downside risk in that first effectively decade, maybe even 15 years, because ultimately developers will continue to release stock. And if there isn't that pent-up demand that's sitting behind that, and we can usually only see 1 or 2 years in our minds, we don't know what's going to happen economically, any events that could disrupt that. And we also know through analysis that property's long-term value comes in the land. We were talking about that earlier with Kristy's question. And there's a ripple effect. So from the central business districts and the mine centres, over the long term of time, they are the areas that will start to show value growth, and that ultimately ripples out as affordability takes it and plays out there. So, and that's why the land values are also vastly more expensive in the inner city areas compared to what they are in the greenfield location. So that's a good starter, Bryce, but I'll let you pick up the conversation.
Yeah, well, I think it just comes down to short-term versus long-term thinking, because it is a fact that in some cases, you actually are seeing the stage land release where the people are getting at stage one, buy it at a certain price, they get pre-sales or whatever they need for funding. So it entices people in, and then stage two, because it's sold out and they use triggers, scarcity triggers that mean that people pay more for the second stage and the third stage. So it is true that you can actually make some early wins based on land price adjustments that work to your favour if you're early. So to your point, Wayne, yes, that is definitely possible. But what's important, and I think Ben's touched on it, is the size of the land that you're getting and the percentage. So you're buying a lot of house and not as much land, versus when you're going into the established areas. And think about Kristy's question. She's got this really large block of land on a house that's built in the 80s, right? So when she bought it, and we don't know that, dare say she paid a fair bit of the purchase price for the land, and probably a little bit for the actual value of the house, right? And that's super important, right? And then at the end of the day, the long-term performance of the properties come down to the scarcity value. So in some of these new estates, they, in my experience, you may see it differently, but it's a lot of entry into market, first timers into the market. They buy, they go into a showroom, they pick their carpet, they pick all their tiles and that. And then later on, once it's built with the benefit of experience, they go, oh, I probably might have changed that facade and I might have done that colour differently. And you see those sorts of decisions spread across the suburb. And then also there's quite a concentrated mix of demographics. It's either investors or people that are entry level to the property game, which is great, right? I'm certainly being respectful of that. But ultimately, when you get into scenarios that we're in now, you have sentiment in the market, which is a little nervy, a little bit sketchy. Interest rates are moving. There's a big concentration across these suburbs where the demographic is exactly the same, where they're all got limited amounts of savings in the bank. They might have similar stretches to afford the property. They all got the same incentives from the government to get in. So there's no diversity of demographics, whereas if you buy in another suburb that's more established, you might have someone who lives in that suburb for the last 30 years, fully debt paid off. You might have someone who's just entered that suburb, debt right up to 90%, right? And then everywhere along that spectrum, which gives it some breathing space on the fluctuations of that suburb. So I think that's the biggest point for us, Wayne. You know, we're in an undersupplied scenario where we're not releasing enough land, and in the right areas you are going to see what you get. But here's the point that I want to amplify. Over the journey, if we go to Kristy's question earlier, we're playing the 20+ year game. Over the journey, 1% difference in performance matters. 2% difference in performance matters, because those compounding exercises mean that it starts to run away if you're 2% better off. So what we're not saying here is you won't make money, because in some cases you will. And if you hold it long enough, chances are time will do a lot of work for you. But what if you had the choice at the same period of time to buy something where the house was a bit older and it was a bit more established and a bit closer in, and then over the same 20 years, in that small period of time, you made your 50, 60 grand at the beginning, because of the maybe 100 grand for the price difference. But over the journey, the value of the established property, in my experience, having back tested scores and scores and scores and scores of properties' performance right back to when they were originally built and purchased, the evidence that we see overwhelmingly is the closer we can get to what was the podcast number, Ben, where we went to economic activity and being in the hubs and what drives the prices. I think it was the one just before summer series, wasn't it, last year?
Yep.
I'll just have a listen to that. The closer you can get to those economic clusters, the better the performance of the property. So 1 or 2% difference matters over time, particularly when you can throw a bit of scarcity into the mix, Ben.
And another way to think about it, Wayne, and also for the general community is, can you ever make a case or a hypothesis that properties in the outer suburbs on the fringe, the city fringes, will actually be the land will be more expensive than the inner city land? Because remember that, don't forget, we talked about the repurposing of the land. So not only, at some point, if we go back, say 100 years or even 50 years, the size of the city wasn't as big as it was. So remember, we go through that series of rural zoning into residential zoning, into light commercial, and into, high-rise zoning and all that type of stuff. So with that backdrop, it's very unlikely that we're going to see, that land be valued proportionate to the inner city land. And so you also then overlay that with what Bryce was saying. It's usually first home buyers country. It's usually people getting in and they're usually buying out there because of affordability and or they want a new home, something pretty. Now, they normally have higher debt exposures as well. And that's usually tapped out by their income. So income does play a significant role in the future redevelopment and future investment back into that area. So, when we look at areas that might have a mix of, sort of houses that were built in the 70s and 80s, and then now new subdivisions that are happening for what we call infill, brownfill areas where they might have knocked over a series of factories or whatever, and they've rezoned that for housing stock. When those houses get built next to the older houses, guess which house you want to be owning? You absolutely want to be owning the old house, which is usually a bigger land footprint. And ultimately, the new houses next door are built on, say, 400 square meters of dirt. They're all house. The land to asset ratio is completely skewed the wrong way, but it does drag up the value of that freestanding house with that freestanding land next to it over time. So you just think that 20 years beyond that, the whole area is going to be developed and mature. And that's basically how you want to look at these things. So we're saying, again, that this is a general rule of thumb. I promise you that Spruikers will show you in the 50-odd states that they've invested in, they'll show you the 4 or 5 that they've done really well in, and they've timed the market really well, and they'll give you those case studies. What you want to be doing is saying, okay, over the full case study story, how have all of them done, in terms of what that looks like, because that's the risk. Right now there is a chronic undersupply. That undersupply is only going to get worse with the immigration coming in. So you could make a case in certain pockets of the market around Australia where maybe the land is quite mature around the outskirts. So you do not want to be where, you drive out to the estate area and as far as the eye can see, it's farmland. That's where the risk lives. But if you can find small pockets of new subdivisions where a lot of it has been built around you, you're probably giving yourself a reduced risk level there. And that's what we're talking about here. We're sort of saying, on balance, the evidence suggests and the data suggests that it'll underperform, and that from a capital growth point of view. So to your point, yes, lower stamp duties, yes, in terms of the depreciation helps with cash flow. But if you ever do sell that asset, just remember it does form part of your capital costs. So you never really win on that story unless you hold on to it and pass it on or bequeath it as part of that transition of wealth to future generations. So I think we've done a pretty decent summary there, Bryce, in terms of what's happening. But we could speak about this all day.
Yeah. But we get people to say that to us all the time. I've done pretty well, right? So all investors are not the same. Some people just cannot buy established. They cannot afford the shortfall that comes from that. They need the tax savings to actually get into the market. So horses for courses, right? You need to know your risk profile and your circumstances. In some case, it may, with all the incentives that are on offer, it may just make sense that you get in, you're on the market. So we never want to argue with anyone who wants to get into the market, right? But all things being equal, the idea is to not, if there is a reason why brand new cars are suggested that they come off the lot cheaper as soon as you roll them on the street, is because they're no longer brand new anymore. So you are paying premiums for having the brand new stuff. The first tenant is paying premium to be the person that smells the new fibers for the first time. But over time, the game is long. The game is over the journey. And if you can get that 1 or 2% better as a result of being closer in and making the decision early on for that, you're playing the long game. If it's a short game, you're doing a timing thing, you need to get in and out. Who knows? Maybe that might be an opportunity for you there. But good question, Wayne. It comes up.
Go Pies, Wayne. Go Pies.
It will come up again, folks. You may have the same thing. Some people listen to some of our earlier episodes in the podcast, but 8 years ago, the conditions in the market were very different, Ben, to what they are now. So there's been some pivots, and we could buy stuff on the inner areas of some of the metropolitan capital cities that those opportunities are now in 7 figures. You can't do that anymore. So we do evolve, but one thing's remained the same. All things being equal, we would prefer to buy established over brand new. Good question, Wayne. Thank you for that. Let us know to both you and Kristy, and we'll send you a copy of the Start and Build course. Next question is from Ned, Ben, and it's regarding windfall gains tax.
Yeah, g'day Bryce, g'day Ben. Firstly, thanks so much for all the work you do with the Property Couch podcast as well as your book. I've really enjoyed my time listening and reading. So thanks for all the hard work that you do. It's really valued by all of your community, no doubt. My name's Ned. I'm 22. I'm from Adelaide, and I had a question about windfall gains tax, particularly how that looks in the Victorian market. I think it could be of interest to people who either hold currently assets in the rural sector or those looking to potentially invest in that market too. So, yeah, if you could explain what it is exactly, first of all, and how it looks going into the next few years, I think a lot of people would be interested. So thanks, guys, and looking forward to your response.
Good question, Ned. Windfall gains tax. It probably won't affect the majority of the people listening to this, Ben, but it's good to be across what it actually is and if it's going to impact you. And first of all, let's just tip our hat to Victoria, leading the way again, Ben, being the first to introduce this. Hopefully the rest of the states don't follow along like sheep. Hopefully they look into it.
Am I allowed to have a dig?
Oh, why stop now?
Obviously, economic mismanagement. They need to raise more taxes because they're basically, the most indebted, most mismanaged economic state in the country. And this is the consequences. They've got to find ways to actually raise tax revenue because they don't know how to manage an economy.
Hey folks, real quick, I just want to share with you that Ben and I have developed a free masterclass on how to build a property portfolio and retire on $2,000 a week in any market, where we share 3 secrets every property investor must know. Secret 1, how to buy an investment property without impacting the family budget. Secret 2, how to retire on $2,000 per week with 5 properties or less. And secret number 3, how to model the mindset of the world's best investors. You can check it out for free right now by going to thepropertycouch.com.au/masterclass. All right, now let's get back to the show. Mate, lock them down for 2 years. You've got to recover the economy. So, all right, so windfall gains tax, what is it? So it's a new tax for landowners on the uplift in value, Ben, in Victoria, in land that's rezoned after the 1st of July 2023. So what does that mean in simple terms? If by the stroke of a pen, the value of your land increases because of zone changes, the government wants a bit. And when I say a bit, Ben, it's actually quite a lot. So let's go through a few of the basics, then we'll do an example, and then we'll talk to it. So commences on the 1st of July 2023. But it relates to contracts that are entered into after the 15th of May 2021. So
you can't quickly rush and go out and put a contract together.
It's locked away. Yeah. It applies to all rezoned land in Victoria. Here's the kicker: over 2 hectares, Ben, with limited exceptions. Now, For those of you that love acres, Ben and I put it into Google. It's just under 5 acres, folks. So you can just get your head around how big the land has to be as a minimum. The landowner at the date of the rezoning is liable to pay the tax. The date of rezoning is determined under the Planning and Environment Act. The tax is applied to the value uplift, right? And they'll do a revaluation, Ben. They do that through the capital improved value, the CIV, right? Here's where the thresholds kick in. If you've had an uplift between 100,000, Ben, and 500,000, 10%? No. 20%? No. 50%? Not 50%, 62.5%, Ben.
Coming after you, Bryce. The government, you can't trust them. Don't trust governments ever. Don't trust them.
It's almost 2/3 they're taken, all right, just from a pen stroke. But if it's over 500,000, here's the relief, Ben. If it's a 500,000 or more, 500,000 or more, it's only 50%. You only have to give half to the government. That's fair enough. There's no cash flow event, Ben. Surely you don't have to pay it straight away. No, yes. In fact, you do pay it straight away. You have to pay it within 30 days of the assessment. 30 days. But subject to some conditions, you can defer it. But here's the deal. You can defer it up to 30 years. But for the privilege of deferring it, Ben, guess what? You're going to pay interest.
You're paying interest. You're paying interest, Bryce.
Oh boy, it gets more. So if you have a dutiable, I can't even say the word. Can you say dutiable transaction of such as a sale? The deferral will end. You cannot defer it past your sale. That's when it happens. And any unpaid WGT, we've heard of CGT, Ben, we've got WGT now. Any unpaid WGT, that sits as a first charge against the land. And there is a strict 60-day time limit to eject. All right, let's put an example in here. Let's assume you have farming land. So you've got existing real estate, it's farm zone, it's CIV, its capital improved value is $2 million, Ben. All right. And let's say that it got rezoned after the 1st of July, 2023, and it's now residential land. Beautiful. Okay, cut it up, subdivide it. Beautiful. Let's assume that in the example, the new capital improved value goes from 2 million to 6 million, Ben. That means that your windfall gains tax is above 500,000, so it's 50%. The actual gain is 4 million. So for the privilege of that happening, Ben, you give $2 million to the Victorian State Revenue Office to say thank you for improving the value of my land through rezoning.
But Bryce, I want to keep farming. I want to, look, the city 50 years ago when I bought this beautiful bit of land and I run a few cattle and I'm making hay and I'm in self-control. I don't want to sell I don't want residential land subdivision in this area. But I'm not in control. That's right. The government. And so I'm going to be hit with a tax bill that I've got 30 days to pay it, or I've got 60 days to object to it. But then ultimately, if I don't pay it and I don't sell the land, they're going to start charging me interest based on the value of that land.
Mate, on your 2 million.
Right. Okay. So I've got to sit back and say, all right, well, here's the deal. Is the interest going to be higher than the capital appreciation that I'm going to get over the next 20 or 30 years? Maybe not. Yeah. Maybe not. But when do they set it? Do they set it then, or do they set it when I'm trying to sell it? Because if the windfall gain tax is in the future, I'm giving more tax money to the government. I mean, this is.
So the relief is, though, Ben, if you go and spend all this money on preparing, in preparation for rezoning, surely that's deductible against that amount? No. Apparently it's not.
No, Bryce. Look,
where's the incentive for people to go and for developers to go and work on finding feasibilities on rezoning of the land when the government has set a target of 1 million homes to be built over a 5-year period, and they create some disincentives like that? I think.
Who pays, Bryce? Who pays ultimately?
Well, ultimately, it will be reflected in the purchase price that the developers have to pay, which the WGT would be part of the vendor selling, which. This will come as a surprise to you, Ben. Poor old person at the end of the chain will be paying.
So, Bryce, is this helping with housing affordability? Like if the government's going to take this additional tax, is that going to help bring prices down?
Well, maybe. The way that could happen is if all the farmers go, all right, we don't want to defer and let's all put the land on at the same time. And then all of a sudden there's a bunch of supply that comes on, which then obviously impacts how much we can do. But no developer is interested. Like, show me a developer who's interested in putting product into the market where supply meets demand. Tell me any developer. They want to put it into, or the other way, where supply exceeds demand. They're only interested at the very minimum where supply meets demand, but ideally they want to find it where demand exceeds supply so that they can make a commercial return on the risk they take.
Yep, risk-adjusted return, people. So ultimately the developers are going to sit back and go, margins don't quite work, nothing to see here, not going to be buying that farmland and developing that into the critical housing stock that we need. So we're moving on here because also, well, at the end of the day, we can't get money out of the banks at the moment because APRA's got a 3% buffer rate, so I can't even get the loan over the line. So even if we want to buy it, we can't because, basically we're being too conservative. Bryce, what's been our message from day one on this show about governments and their intention of looking after us? What have we always said?
We've said that's probably not the optimal result for the
I
point is that there's people who make
clear.
policy who don't understand the mechanics and how the realities of the property market work. It's just time after time policies get done with the same lack of understanding.
Well, no, I mean, at the end of the day, because of poor economic mismanagement, we've got the record level of debt in this state, and so we've got to go and raise revenue. And the best way to raise revenue is, in their mind, these people at a stroke of a pen, so this is the political spin, at a stroke of the pen, these people make millions of dollars. True, if they wanted to sell the land, but they're forcing the farmers now to actually start, ratcheting up, the tax that they have to pay. So I don't disagree. There is wealth that's being created from the stroke of a pen, and the government's coming after that money. So please, if this hasn't already landed for you, because we're also seeing it with super as well now, is that we said, I don't know what episode it was, I reckon it was probably back in the first 20 episode, Bryce, what did I say about super? It will be changed. The government will come after your money. There's going to be absolutely no consistency in terms of any type of super policy or any type of land policy or any type of any policy, because the governments need to keep, the politicians need to go into power. They need to promise everyone more and more and more. People vote for that more and more and more promise. There's no contrition, no sensible management of money, and ultimately means we all pay more and they come after our money. So don't trust the government. Keep doing what you're doing for mum and dad investors, because at the end of the day, coming back to your main point, Bryce, in your intro around feeling in control, having autonomy, the best way to have autonomy, because they'll keep coming after your money. So, yep, you're just going to have to accept that. But still the best way is to have autonomy, and that is to execute on a sensible money management and wealth creation plan over the long term. And then even if they take a little bit more of your money, you're still in control of that, because that's the frustrating bit of a tax like this. I get it. Now the risk is there's going to be, other states and territories that follow suit. And then all of a sudden now, again, housing affordability, we say we care about it on one hand. We know it's a supply issue. We absolutely know it's a supply issue. But we're just going to take a little bit more, even though the Housing Industry Association did a study several years ago that says 41% of the cost of new builds is taxes, government fees, charges, and taxes. So, I mean, there's no easy answer here.
Or you could state a case if they were going to take that windfall gains tax and plough it directly back into where the land was that they're putting into the infrastructure, that the developers actually need to be see happening from government support, so that they will then take the risk to actually put the land out there so they can see the people coming. Sure, but it's just going to go into the big pot and then be distributed elsewhere, and that's
correct. Yeah. That's right. So, look, thanks for the question, Ned. It's a good one. I did get the same question on a recent Picker webinar, and because it's only going to affect, obviously, people who've been land banking. But if you've got a 5-acre lot If it's already resi, then you should be protected. But if you've got a little hobby farm on the fringe of town and you're thinking, well, this is effectively my super fund, and it will be, and those people will still be, well served. They'll get a lot of money from it, but it just goes to show you that's like, wow, like they won't miss you. Anyone who's getting an advantage from society, get your checkbook out because the government's coming for you.
And so, two things. Thanks for your question, Ned. But secondly, be very careful about giving us a politically laced question because we can see that we'll get on our high horse. All right, stand down. Thank you. Question 4. This one's from Cam, and this is the old chestnut Ben, property and shares. Should we be diversifying? It's a good question. Let's have a little listen now.
Hi, Bryce and Benji. Hi, guys. My name's Cam. Now, I have a question for you. If diversification is really the key to growth and the key to your assets, then would you recommend considering other asset classes such as shares or ETFs? The reason being is obviously we all love diversification and we don't want to throw our eggs into one basket. Obviously, the great thing with property is that there is a lot of leverage that you can place onto one asset. You could control a $500,000 property for less than 20%, even in some cases 5% down. But if diversification is the key and you had a sizable amount that you wanted to truly be diversified with franking credits and dividends being paid, is shares and ETFs something that all people should consider? Or are shares and ETFs something that people should consider in conjunction or in combination with maybe a couple of investment properties? Cheers, guys.
Mate, it never gets old hearing that everyone having a little cheap shot about the Benji at the beginning. Aren't you glad you said that many episodes again, Ben? When anyone calls me Benji.
Camgy, can I call him Camo? Camgy? No.
Benji, yeah.
Cam, great question. We need to obviously put a little disclaimer here that, in terms of shares and ETFs, they're licensed investment products. We can't go too deep in terms of giving personal advice around those. We can speak to the conversation, which is the broad one here around diversification. Now, the best investors in the world will tell you that diversification is not what they look at. They look at buying great companies, investing in those companies, or, if you're a property investor, how you look at diversification traditionally is you be a borderless investor and you look at the data and the return on investment and the risk profile. All of those things come into play. Now, for our general community, how I approach this is really simple. To Bryce's point, 2 or 3 really good properties, maybe not in the same location, but you could still make a case for, as an example, I own one property in one street and the next door neighbour's property comes up and I buy that one. And so all of a sudden now I've got a small development site. Well, that's not diversifying, but obviously that's increasing risk, but you're going to get a greater return on, basically the productive use of that land. So that's where the exceptions to the rule live. But it's well accepted for mum and dad investors around the world that a diversified portfolio and taking action around managing that risk over the long period of time is a great way to build financial peace and also financial control. And so with that as our frame, and the lens in which we're looking through, I see no issues at all with the idea of having a share portfolio, ETFs as part of that particular story. ETFs are a fabulously low cost. You're getting the benchmark return of the market in a lot of respects in terms of that. There's more exotic ETFs that are being created all the time, but the classic ETFs that track the performance of an index and so forth have proven to be very reliable over the long term as well. In terms of direct share investment, that's where it gets a little bit more tricky. I could tell you that my long-term direct share investment returns have been mixed. I've had some absolute breakout results, but I've also had some losses as part of that particular story as well. So, but I always work on, thinking about your cost of managing those investments and the effort and time you put in, there should be a correlation in terms of the more effort and time you put into it, hopefully you're getting a better return. If you're time poor and you can't allow for that to happen, then my view is to look at those really low cost ETFs as part of your makeup in terms of what you're putting together. And we're through our supers alone, unless we've got a self-managed super fund, a lot of us are already invested in the equity markets, both here and abroad. And I don't think that's a bad thing in terms of being able to build, household wealth over the long term.
Yeah, I think it's important also here, Cam, to declare that personally, I have shares, crypto, property, so there is diversification. But what I can tell you is in my own personal journey is I actually specialize in property first. So I build up a portfolio and then over time added diversity. So there's a couple of things, right? Because it's never beneficial, I don't think, to have a property versus shares conversation, because the property person says, get a haircut from me, and the shares person says, no, this is the barber you should get a haircut from, right? So that'll go for the dawn of time, right? That'll always happen. But ultimately, it comes down to we just talked about super earlier about how that gets changed. There is a whole lot of volatility that comes from getting in shares that isn't necessarily as prevalent in property. But with shares, you can get in at lower amounts. You can do dollar cost averaging. You can reinvest dividends to buy more over time. So ultimately, for me, it's kind of if someone is in the property or the shares game, Ben, I always say, well done, let's get huddle and say, how can we get more people into this game? Your shares, your crypto, your art, your property, great. We're one of the small few who actually take action. How do we help more people who haven't taken action, get them into what they prefer? Because some people would prefer shares. Franking credits are wonderful. There are a lot of shares in this country that provide franking credits that allow you to get a discount on the tax you've paid because the company's already paid for it on your behalf. Lots of superannuation funds buy those particular companies for those particular reasons, because they've already got a low tax environment anyway, and then they add franking credits and it makes it even less tax. If you are invested in super, which most people are in some form if they've got a job because it's compulsory, you are getting diversification there as well, because depending on the fund, they're going across multiple assets as well. So I'm not sure how to best answer this question, but it says here in the question, are shares and ETFs something that people should consider in combination with a couple of investment properties? And the answer is, yeah, probably. Yeah, probably. Yeah. If you've got a plan and you've got it, you've mapped it out, and it includes some shares, you will never hear Ben or I say that you should never buy shares. You will never hear us say that, because we'd be telling you a mistruth. But what we are saying is leverage, cash on cash return, lower volatility, long game, having a blueprint, and the fact that we combine the basic plan is to get 3 investment properties, pay off your home, combine it with super, and super largely can't invest in direct residential real estate unless you've got self-managed super fund or your trusts or whatever. Maybe they should consider it, Ben.
They should, and it's probably a timely message, Cam, that you also bring to the table, that if you go and get financial advice and investment advice from a financial planner, you're talking to us about property investment. We're overweight in property investment. We fully disclose that. We have most of our private investments heavily weighted in property. So, that's a full disclosure. But what you're also seeing when you go and see a financial planner is direct property usually isn't something that they have support for, or they have professional indemnity to talk about. And so you may get a skewed conversation that moves you towards managed funds and investing in shares and bonds and alike. And that's the frustration we do have around the regulatory framework we have in this country. We would love to see direct residential property as an investment class And we would love to see, financial planners being able to talk about the benefits of direct residential property as part of their mix inside their diversified investment portfolio, because of what Bryce just talked about there in terms of cash on cash return, sensible leverage, making sure cash flows allow for it today and tomorrow. So if you are going to see a financial planner, but you have more confidence in, property prices, the value of land, the prospects of those continuing increasing, you might also want to put in the mix having a chat with a QPIA, Qualified Property Investment Advisor, and talk about the pros and cons there versus obviously the pros and cons that you get in terms of investing in shares and businesses. Finally, Bryce, I am on record as saying that, if you are able to pick, some certain investments in certain companies over the journey, such as Amazon comes to mind, Google comes to mind, those companies that just had breakout valuations and effectively 10,000% returns, you'll never get that in property. Okay, so I'll always say to you that there will be, these unicorn opportunities that turn up. You very rarely get that in property. What you're going to get is a stable, long-term return for those of you who have a moderate risk profile and are comfortable with taking on some debt. And then over 20 or 30 years, you're going to lift your eyes up and go, wow, this has actually been quite material in terms of the wealth that it's built for us.
Yeah, well said. So I think my concluding statement is just to remember, Ben, outside of super, the amount of people in this country who are investors of whatever type or persuasion is the minority. So let's just all have that collective huddle of like, well done, you're in the game, you're taking action. Let's look outside the huddle to see how many more people we can recruit to get inside the huddle, rather than picking at each other within the huddle going, mine's better than yours and yours is better than mine. It's like, that's just rubbish. Action is the number one determiner of success, because there's a lot of people who have a property that they should have bought that they didn't. There's a lot of people who have a story about a share that they should have bought. Like if you had to just bought CBA shares, Ben, back in, when was that, the 90s? They listed for $2.35. They're over $100 now.
CSL.
CSL, any of the tranches of Telstra shares along the way. They're all good stories to have, but the only people who actually get to tell stories of autonomy and the happiness that comes from the freedom of autonomy are the people that actually take action. Yep. So let's never forget that we're all in the huddle as a minority of people in this country who are actually prepared to take the action, invest in something. And that something hopefully gives you some form of security. And for us, the flag is the $2,000 per week, time value adjusted over the journey, so that you can get that autonomy and get that happiness back. So these are all great questions. So folks, just want to remind you, thank you, Kristy. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Ned. And of course, that last question there from Cam. All of us, let us know, reach in. We will get you a copy of that Start and Build course. Hopefully that helps you. Just a disclosure there, Ben. The course is only about property, nothing to do with shares. So just saying. Hey, my life hack today, Ben. Sorry?
Property, cash flow, and mortgages, all of the above, but definitely no shares or ETF.
No, we don't talk about it in that. So, and you shouldn't take advice from us from shares. Let's be honest. No. My life hack today is Google Chrome is the browser of choice for a lot of people, Ben. Although Bing's having a swing at trying to get ChatGPT to get us all over to Bing, but until that happens, so I use it. And I had this little productivity hack that I found super helpful. So do you know when you've got the browsers open, say you've got 10, 15, 20 windows open, Ben, you're researching something.
Wow.
And all of a sudden it just looks like a sea of tabs open. You can actually right click one of those tabs, and then it'll say add the tab to a new group, and you can change the group. So when I was researching for the podcast and I had some other things going on in the business and stuff, I had 3 groups of tabs open. You can color code it, and then you can just click the tab. So let's say, okay, let me try and explain this. Let's say I had 4 in fact, this is what I did. I had 4 SpeakPipe questions open. So I just grouped them in a tab called podcast. I made the podcast yellow because that's our color. And then I can just hit that tab and they'll all collapse. And then all of the tabs, so you can organize the way that you use tabs in Chrome if you've got multiple tabs open. So for those of you that have heaps and heaps of windows open, you're researching, you've got lots of stuff open, you want to group that, try it out. What you do is you right click a tab, add the tab to a new group, Name your group, change the color, push enter, drop as many tabs as you like in there, and then concertina it up, Ben, like that, like the accordion.
Can I have the sound effect again? I really like the sound effect. Oh, I love it. Love it.
And so that's my life hack today. Get on it if you are a prolific user of multiple tabs all at once. Ben, what's making property news?
Well, Bryce, we've been sort of over the last few months been talking about APRA. Well, we saw earlier in the week on Monday, they released a statement clarifying their current position, that right now they feel that the current position of a 3% buffer, is adequate for the current situation in the market. Now, so I would just want to sort of talk to that story, because obviously that's really disappointing news for those people who are looking to refinance, but they're in mortgage jail thanks to interest rates going up at a record pace. So here's the conclusion. We'll cut through all the noise and we'll tell you that the facts are these, that obviously it's very clear that the RBA is worried about any further stimulus into the property market. We have seen, results released this week around Sydney market being flat, small bit of growth. We don't know whether that bit of growth is, now, it's going to be consistent, because we've still got, one, possibly a couple more interest rate increases coming in as well. But I think they are fearful of a spike of demand that's going to, accelerate the property market. Now, that is inflationary. And so that's the logical conclusion of part one. Part two, the big banks are sitting back going, whoa, this is terrific for us. Means that our loan book stays at the same size, even though there's 800,000 people coming out of fixed interest rate periods. It's more likely now that they're not going to be servicing with anyone else. So, of course, the big banks are completely supportive of this move, because it certainly, make sure that they continue to keep holding on to their customers, as opposed to, those opportunities to refinance and move to a better deal with a different lender. So they're the sort of main cases for the current status quo. Obviously, the other side and the argument still is that mortgage jail or mortgage prison that most people talk about is a problem, and so they are going to be collateral damage for the short term when that plays out. It'll obviously contribute to a higher default risk. But you can then see the heads of all the big banks saying, we're going to look after our customers. We're going to put them on repayment holidays. We're going to switch them to interest only. Yeah.
Rewind the tape back to when the pandemic started. Yeah.
Yep. So they know the protocol. So I think if I'm the head of APRA, I'm pretty happy that that's going to be the case. So it doesn't put systemic risk in there. But it obviously does make for a very silly scenario here, where we're talking about assessment rates in that mid-8s to mid-9s, even getting to 10%. And any model that would be released through APRA or the Council of Financial Regulators or RBA would show you that if interest rates get to 9 or 10%, you've got a massive systemic risk in the property space, and also in the stability of the banking system, because effectively the bulk of the wealth that's created and the value that's created through the big banks are actually through residential and lending in those particular markets. So there's no doubt that if you asked a difficult question of the head of APRA around that, so show us your economic modelling in terms of what that would look like, the answer would be, I don't deal in hypotheticals. There's no reason to have a look at that, because we're obviously in a position to move if we see the market deteriorating. So just be mindful of that. If everyone's fearful of interest rates getting to those 8s, 9s, and 10%, it's just not possible. You are talking about a correction that would be so severe and so challenging. It wouldn't be a recession. It would actually be a depression in terms of what would happen. So to that credit, the RBA and APRA and the Council of Financial Regulators know that. So it's just a bit of jawboning that needs to happen, sort of strong arming by the RBA to keep APRA in line to try and get inflation heading down. We'll continue to fight the fight for those people who are affected, the mum and dads who have their mortgages, and try and make sure that they can move to a competitive deal. and we'll, again, through the brokerage businesses that you deal with, they'll haggle just as good with your existing lender as what they will with your alternative lender. So don't give up on that story. If you haven't spoken to a broker about your situation, reach out and do so. But that's the big property news. At the end of the day, we're seeing the macro-prudential interference in the market is further affecting the property market, and they can see that they are throttling property prices, and they'll continue to do so until they see a little clearer pathway to an improving inflation story.
Reinforces the point we've been talking about for the last couple of weeks, Ben, that the system is more important than the individual within the system, and they realise there's a few people that are doing it tough, but that's okay given the way the banks will respond, and the collateral damage is worth it for the integrity of the entire system, not the person who's suffering within the system. So
correct.
Good update. Thank you for that, Ben. I think it was a good day today. We got through some great questions. Thanks to those people that contribute. Just a reminder that we want you to come to thepropertycouch.com.au and leave speak pipe questions about cost of living pressures, what's happening with interest rates rising, and in particular, are you considering selling properties, and what are the thought process that you're going through now versus to get rid of some of the pain versus holding for the long term? I would 100% love to hear from you. If you get read out on the podcast, we will give you a copy of the Start and Build. And next week, Ben, we've got a very special guest, Evan Lucas. He's one of the sharpest and brightest minds. We've got him on the couch to talk about not only how we make decisions in our mind around money, which is fascinating, talking about his latest book, but also his read on the market as we see it, which is really insightful. So until next week, Ben.
Knowledge is empowering, but only if you act on it, Bryce.
Sounds good. See you next week, folks. Hey folks, Bryce here again. I just wanted to catch you real quick before you go. If you're new to our community, I want to encourage you to listen to our very first 20 episodes, as the concepts we share in EPs 1 through 20 are foundational principles, pillars, and frameworks that you need to know for you to get the best value from our content week to week on our show. My little tip is to listen to it at 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have the option to go back to the beginning, don't worry, because we've got you covered as well. We've created a binge guide that summarized these foundational episodes into one easy to digest booklet so that you can get up to speed super fast. So go to the show description on whatever device you're listening to now and simply click on the first 20 episodes link to download it straight away. Oh, and by the way, whilst you're there, you'll find a few extra goodies for you, including a link to download our Lifestyle by Design app, Moorr, the home of Wealth Speed and Wealth Clock, and our hugely popular Money Smarts money management system, as well as how to get free copies of our best-selling books. Now, just a reminder that anything we cover on this podcast is not considered to be financial advice, and we certainly recommend that you seek out expert advice tailored to your unique circumstances, and everything we talk about is general in nature. Folks, I want to encourage you again to click on the show description wherever you are listening to access all the free goodies we have for you. Until next week.